he's gifted. Like, this isn't even something, why does everyone think this is such a bad thing? Like, he is gifted in a way that none of us will ever understand. A lot of times there was nothing you could do. And so I was always in this place of like helplessness. And I remember we were getting ready to go see the parade, and my dad was in the closet, hysterical. This was back when I don't think really people understood the severity of head injury and subsequently brain damage. Life is complicated and messy, and it's all of those things, and it can still be great. And I've been wanting to make this video because it's such a large part of my life and my story, but also for a really long time, I've always known that I wanted to tell this story. I just didn't know in what format I would want to do it. I always thought, you know, maybe in 20 years I'll write a book, but that's a huge endeavor that is always something that like is on the back burner. And I did write an article about this on Medium in 2020 during COVID, and I felt a lot of freedom in sharing it and empowerment. And I do think that it's something that a lot of people, even if they can't directly relate to it, will find pieces of it that they can relate to. And hopefully this is something that, you know, is not just about me sharing, but something that when you listen will feel less alone in certain experiences or understood. This is the story of my father and my childhood and my relationship to this day with my father. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I have not seen him in person in over 10 years. I have spoken to him a little bit over text in the past year, but before that I didn't have any contact with him. And some people probably thought that like he was dead, but he's alive. And yeah, so I'm just gonna go into some of the backstory there. I really think that this is such a long-winded story that it might need to be multiple videos. And I do have a surprising announcement related to this. So this might end up being a series of videos, so we'll see. But just to start, so my dad is paranoid schizophrenic. He was diagnosed with so many different things, but ultimately I think that was the most agreed upon diagnosis. He was diagnosed with like bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, schizoaffective disorder. Paranoid schizophrenia is the one that seems the most aligned with his symptoms. My parents met when they were in college, and my mom is a first-gen immigrant from Korea, and my dad's from here. He's from New Jersey, and they met in college. I'm the oldest child. I have a younger brother, and I'm 30 years old. And the year before I was born, my dad got into a ski accident where he was alone on a double black diamond up in Vermont. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Killington, but it was outer limits on the Killington Mountain. And my dad's an incredible skier, but this was like 30 years ago, and he was skiing without a helmet. He crashed. He broke his arm in half, but most importantly and most unfortunately, he hit his head. He was unconscious for a very long time, literally until someone found him. And it wasn't my mom, because my mom, who's also a really good skier, wasn't experienced enough to go on outer limits, so she was waiting for him at the bottom. And then after a while, she was like, something's wrong. So they found him, he was treated, they fixed his arm, everything. But this was back when I don't think really people understood the severity of like head injury and subsequently brain damage. So years and years later, when he was going to doctors, they pretty much agreed that like he probably had a pre-existing disposition to schizophrenia, and then this was the like catalyst event that awakened schizophrenia for him. Regardless if that's the case or not, he has spent the past 30 years as a schizophrenic man. And, you know, my parents had me in 1994, at the end of 1994, and I don't really have like any memories, obviously, of my dad acting crazy until probably around like 8 years old. And at that point, my brother was around 4 years old. We're like almost 4 years apart. And one of my earliest memories of something being wrong was we were in New York City and we were here for like the Thanksgiving Day parade. We stayed in a hotel in Times Square, and I remember we were getting ready to go see the parade, and my dad was in the closet hysterical. And I didn't really know what was going on. I was just kind of scared, and my mom wanted to, I guess, shield us, so just had us leave, and we went to go see the parade without him. When I say hysterical, like there's a difference between having, you know, like a panic attack, which is also its own beast, but I think in this context, hysterical would be like in the closet, hyperventilating, crying, but biting the inside of his mouth so hard he's bleeding, shaking, just being in the most intense state of mania and fear at the same time. My dad's fear, because with paranoid schizophrenia, you have delusions, and a lot of times these are delusions of persecution. And my dad had delusions of persecution by like the government and by random bystanders. So my dad was constantly in fear that the government was trying to have him assassinated. A lot of times these delusions like have grounds in reality. And what I mean is my dad had been an engineer and had worked for a company that sold to Intel. He was just a computer engineer back when like you were literally like soldering computer boards and coding in like binary. When they sold this company to Intel, I believe that like one of his ex-coworkers became like some sort of government official. And so that's the piece of like reality where I think his delusions like grasped onto that and then just went way off track. Anyways, a lot of his delusions were that like he had worked on something at Intel that the government has a vendetta against and like wants to have all of these secrets from Intel, and they want to like assassinate him. And he wasn't, it's not like he was like even an important figure at this company. So a lot of these were delusions. So they were not real in any sense. That was my earliest memory of something being wrong. And then obviously as I got older, I knew that things were very, very wrong and that he was mentally ill. But even back then, mental illness was not treated the way it is now, and the stigma was 100 times worse than it is now. And we were in a pretty small town where like a lot of people all knew each other, and my parents didn't really know anyone, and my mom was an immigrant. So like there were a lot of contributing factors to why my mom wanted us to try to keep everything a secret. But it was really hard to do that because when my dad's manic and delusional, he is like outside, like yelling at people and basically accusing people of wild things and just acting in irrational ways. So there was only so much that could be done to like try to seem like a normal family, and it didn't work. I think all of us had different stances on this. Like my mom was really embarrassed and ashamed and wanted everything to be a secret. My brother felt similarly, and I think my brother just was more scared and like wasn't close with my dad. And so there was like that disconnect. But I was super close with my dad, and it contributed to me being unashamed and kind of switching from, instead of being embarrassed, I disliked everyone else. Anyone else that would make us feel embarrassed, I disliked them. I almost felt like protective over my dad and my family for this. I just had a really, really close relationship with him because we just had really similar interests and like personalities kind of. Well, no, we don't have similar personalities, but we have really, really similar interests. And he was always interested in really niche things. Like he was really, really passionate about space and physics and cars and engineering and music and the arts and stuff like that. And he was really, really creative and artistic. And so I always like idolized him. And I remember growing up with this mentality of like, he's gifted. Like this isn't even something, why does everyone think this is such a bad thing. Like, he is gifted in a way that none of us will ever understand. And I still think that a lot of that is true. Unfortunately, being gifted in that way doesn't outweigh, it causes a lot of other issues, clearly. Anyways, I just had a really close relationship with him. And so when things started to get really, really bad, I was probably the most impacted. Me being the older child, when my parents got divorced, I was around 12 or 13. And once I did turn 18, I basically became the only point of contact for my dad. My brother didn't want anything to do with him. My mom didn't want anything to do with him. And I still very much cared about helping him. But a lot of times there was nothing you could do. And so I was always in this place of like helplessness. When my parents got divorced, my mom and I and my brother stayed in our house and my dad moved out. My dad already had a lot of issues with taking his medication. As some of you might know, like if you're familiar with these mental health conditions, you know that they'll take certain medication and then stop taking it once they feel better because they don't think they need it. Or sometimes if they have delusions of like poison, they won't want to take medication because they think that it's going to harm them. And so my dad just was never able to stay on medication. And then when he was living on his own, obviously that became even more exacerbated. And I just remember that he couldn't hold a job. He couldn't hold relationships with anyone. My dad has no friends. He's on disability. I'm not even sure that like he gets checks for disability, and I'll go into more of why. But he couldn't hold a job. He was always in danger. Like, he was just always putting himself in dangerous situations because of his state of mania and delusions. And so I was always scared, and it was just a constant, like, I would have contact with him for 3 months and then he would disappear because being afraid of the government and persecution and surveillance, he would like throw away all of his, his phone, his computer, everything. It would just be gone and you wouldn't be able to contact him. And so I would constantly be going back and forth from this like, oh, he's okay, and then being worried that something's wrong. There are a ton of stories, like micro stories of things that my dad got into and all of that during his states of mania, but I don't think that I don't want to go into that right now. Ultimately, once I was 18, I remember my dad was arrested. They contacted me and, they had him, they were holding him. He lost everything. He lost his home. He lost his dog that he had because they took it, and he was just completely disabled. Like, I don't know how else to put it. And he just kept living in this way and would be arrested and released, released, hospitalized, released, and nothing was ever a long-term resolution. And so ultimately, I want to say when I was like 20, when I was 20, he left the country and went to Turkey. He was living in Turkey to avoid the US government, and he got arrested there. And in Turkey, it's really difficult to make an argument of insanity once you are in court. So he actually ended up going to jail in Turkey for 7 years, and I had no contact with him. And during those 7 years, I went through a lot of different feelings, but I also made a lot of progress with like forgiving myself for things that I was feeling guilty for, or being able to, understand that my dad is someone that I love and I look up to, but he wasn't someone that was a good parent. He's not someone that I'm ever probably going to have like a really, really close, normal father-daughter relationship with. I made a lot of progress. And then last year, I actually got an email, and it was from him saying that he was released. They deported him back to the United States. He was in the hospital. This was really jarring because I had spent 7 years just not speaking to him, trying not to think about it really, and moving on with my life, because in a lot of ways, I think it was holding me back emotionally when all of this stuff was like top of mind. So at first I wasn't sure, like, do I even want to talk to him? I don't know. And especially because the pattern would always be like me speaking to him being happy that he seems okay and he's medicated and everything, and then a month later things would be immediately bad. So I wasn't really sure if I wanted to speak with him, and it took me a couple months to come around to it, and I still haven't spoken to him like on the phone or anything. It's just all over email or text. He had told me that he was, brought to the hospital in New Jersey. He was being treated with electrotherapy. So they're, I think, like every month shocking him. Basically, I've given him like 6 months to kind of not prove, but like basically display to me that he's stable, because he was claiming, this therapy was helping him. And so as of today, he seems to be still stable a year later. But the sad thing is that he doesn't seem all there. And I think that's a side effect of electrotherapy. And I don't think he'll ever be all there again. And that's something that I've come to terms with. And I don't think things will ever be normal. And when I say all there, it's like my dad came back from Turkey after like 7-8 years of not seeing me, and like was just like, hey, how are you? Like, that's not normal. Like, he doesn't have this ability to feel empathy or to like have contextual understanding of like the gravity of things. So when we do speak, it's just like as if, and he's just like, how's work? There's just never, I don't think there's ever going to be that normal like interpersonal relationship that we come to expect from people. Like, if someone hurts you, usually they have the capacity to like sit down and have this conversation where they like understand why this is such a big deal. Or like, it seems like he has no understanding of like how crazy all of this was. And I've come to terms with that, and I don't need him to. I am just happy that he's like okay, and I also want to be protective over my life now. Like, I'm a 30-year-old woman. I have my own life. I have my own job. I have my own pets. Maybe in the future I'm going to have my own family. And I've come to terms with, having him at arm's length. So, for example, he doesn't have my real phone number. I use like a temporary number to text him. He doesn't know where I live or anything like that. Ultimately, I have been debating on whether or not I want to see him in person this year. So he is living at I guess like assisted living or something, some sort of housing in New Jersey. It's really not that far away. So it is really strange. And he has asked me if like I'll come and see him. But I want to do it on my own time, on my own terms. I've gotten to a place now where, I accept that nothing's ever going to be normal. I'm not going to have this like super close relationship. It's not going to feel like my parent. It's going to feel like, I don't know exactly how to feel, but it's not like the relationship that I have with my mom where she feels like my mom and I like can rely on her and I can talk to her about things and she's like understands what's going on. I don't think it's ever going to be like that. But I do think that if I didn't see him and God forbid something happened, or, I waited too long and he was ill or something, I don't know. I think I would regret that. I've been getting closer and closer to feeling like, okay, I want to go see him. Maybe we can grab a coffee. I just want to see his face. And I always have this like underlying desire where I always want to just be like, I want to tell him everything I want to tell him everything I've done and like show him my dogs and like talk about everything I've accomplished. I think that I can, and I would love to do that, but I also don't expect that to register to him in any substantial way. And I think it's truly just for me, which is fine. But yeah, I used to feel like really bad because, for example, he had no one. Like, he just didn't have anyone. And I think that's what happens when you're so mentally ill and you don't have like the proper treatment. Like, it's impossible to maintain relationships. It's impossible to maintain work. It's impossible to have a home. He's just so alone, and I used to feel so much guilt about it. Like, it was my responsibility to be the one person that he has in his life. And I think I've gotten past that, where now I can go see him and still not feel responsible for like if he feels lonely, whatever those things might be. That's why I'm like finally at a place where I can maybe consider seeing him. We'll see. But yeah, I do think the more in detail story of my life with a schizophrenic dad and his life and all of the in between, I think, is a much longer story that I eventually do want to tell. It's just such a long story. So I need to figure out like how I want to break it down and etc. Yeah, and I have a completely different relationship with my mom, and we also had a lot of issues, and like I had a really hard time growing up. My mom was a single parent, and when they got divorced, she was working all of the time. She was never there. She also had her own issues that were probably really hard, but like as a kid, sometimes it doesn't matter what your parents are going through, you need them. And so that's a whole other thing. Yeah, this is pretty much the story of like where things stand right now and why I haven't seen my dad and why he's not in my life. But yeah, he's definitely like always been a pillar of inspiration to me regardless. Like he was just such a brilliant, smart engineer, just so gifted, and like was so in love with art. He was making sculptures all the time. He was always taking me museum. He genuinely inspired me in so many ways that I would never want to change. I think, there's no animosity. This isn't a story of like someone who really, really wronged me. Although I think he unintentionally wronged me in a lot of ways, but I don't hold any animosity about it, because I think there's a separation between what someone does when they're cognizant of what it will do to you versus when someone genuinely has no control over their actions and like their brain. So yeah, that's the story of my dad. And if you had told me 15 years ago that I would be able to say all of this and like share it with you on the internet, I would have been like, oh my God, what? That's crazy. And so I thank you guys for being here and giving me confidence and support. I hope that if you have any experiences with something even slightly like this, that you know that there's a ton of us out here and life is complicated and messy, and it's all of those things, and it can still be great. That's what makes the human experience so fucking unique. So I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.